So delays. We just listened to that example of creating a three-dimensional mix, something with a depth of feel, an acoustic space, something that's not two-dimensional. So yeah, delays help create a space, an artificial space in which that performer is playing. It adds dimension, can be used as an effect, can be used for phase correction. We talked about phase cancellation when a positive waveform is negated by a negative waveform, so we use that to correct phase. And although now delays are digitally emulated, it was originated with tape delays. It's a good mechanical visual representation of what's actually going on in the computer domain. So this discussion is going to go into how these tape delays were created, what advantages they gave us, and not only are they great visual representation, but a lot of the delays and effects that we use in modern DAWs are derivative or emulations of older tape delays and older analog effects. So here's a breakdown of a tape delay. We have your signal that's being recorded. Whether it's vocal, guitar, this is a signal that's coming in. Essentially, that signal gets split. One goes to the output, one goes into this tape delay circuit. It's recorded onto tape, this being tape, and here is a playback head. That tape just gets looped around in a circle, it gets erased, and that's where it's recorded again. So we have this basic function, and we have two parameters that can be controlled as far as delay time and speed. We could speed or slow down the tape to create a slower delay or a faster delay, but that causes artifacts within the tape. Usually, if you're slowing down tape, you're going to end up with your input signal pitched down. If you speed it up, you're going to have your input signal pitched up, and it's not going to correlate in time. So the best parameter we have to control delay time is the distance in which this playback head is physically placed in relation to this record head. If the playback head is closer to the record head, you're going to have a quicker delay. If it's farther away, it's going to be a slower delay. So our most basic function of delays is that delay time. The time is that differential from the input signal to that playback head. Now in the computer domain, we have the ability to synchronize the delay time in beats per minute or milliseconds. It's good to kind of have this understanding of the relationship between beats and milliseconds, as you're not always going to have the ability to sync up delays, say in the situation of performing live sound, or if the performance is fluctuating, if there is no click or there's no grid. In the world of analog tape delays, we have mechanical or speed controls. The mechanical control being that distance of the record head to the play head versus the tape speed. And adjusting the tape speed creates artifacts known as flutters, which is actually emulated in digital delays that we still use today. It's something that we're used to hearing now because it's been used in so many recordings. And again, those flutters kind of create another depth of feel, adds another dimension to that sound. So we'll still be using that. So we have a couple different examples of delay time. This is going to be a hi-hat signal, pan left and right. The first example is going to be what's known as the Haas effect, around 25 milliseconds. This is a very short, very quick delay. It has kind of a widening effect. It thickens the sound. There's no audible delay as a distinction of the delay starts here and ends here. It kind of blends into that original sound. It's used a lot in hip-hop vocals, pop vocals to thicken up that sound. All right, so let's listen to that again. 75 milliseconds is what's known as the slapback effect. Something around 75 milliseconds, 80 milliseconds, more independent of your tempo. This would be rockabilly vocals, guitars have this slapback effect where it's directly, immediately after that initial attack of the instrument. So we hear left and right. There is a distinction between the delay. When we get to about 100 milliseconds up to 120 milliseconds, it's still in the realm of a slapback effect, but it is more dependent on that tempo. The milliseconds, the amount of delay, you're going to want to adjust that delay time so it fits nicely within that tempo, whether it's a 16th note, etc. If it has a certain feel, a swing feel, around 100 milliseconds to 120, even 130, still a slapback, but again, it's less independent of that tempo. And you hear that example. Around 250 milliseconds, we have an eighth note delay at 120 BPM. So, again, this is obviously going to be very much more dependent on the tempo. This is where you use delays as effects, repeats. And lastly, 500 milliseconds would be the quarter note delay at 120 BPM. So obviously, quite a bit of delay, usually used as an effect, or we're going to talk about how to use delays as a propagational effect, psychoacoustic propagational effect within kind of thicker texture music, thicker productions, where reverbs would have more of a smearing effect and to create that artificial ambience using longer delays, like quarter note, eighth note delays. So modulation, this would be another parameter of delays that we typically see in DAWs. Up on top, I have a screenshot of the Logic delay. Down here, it's the H delay by waves. This modulation equates to time differentials in a cycle. This creates additional stereo imaging, again, creates depth and effects. For example, 100 millisecond modulation delay could fluctuate plus or minus in milliseconds. So this is the equivalence of the irregularities of these tape delays. How quickly this fluctuation happens is determined by the modulation rate. The plus or minus fluctuation is determined by the modulation depth. So 100 millisecond modulation delay is that rate, and the plus and minus 10 milliseconds is that depth. Traditionally, this effect is achieved by actually slowing and speeding up the tape, resulting in pitch fluctuation, the artifacts that we call fluttering effects, and it gives it a unique sound, again, helps create a stereo image. And the examples I'm going to show you may or may not be too extreme depending on their usage. However, like in that example I showed you before, it's not necessarily about what you're hearing that creates that depth, that image. It's more about what's underlying to help bring out the three-dimensional space you're trying to emulate in your mix. So this is going to be a sustained electric piano. The original signal is going to be pan left. The delay signal is going to be pan right. So the first example we're going to have is a depth of 24, rate of 1 hertz. Next is depth of 100, rate of 1 hertz. The rate is going to be the same, but it's going to be even wider range of this tape fluctuation. You got some extremely high artifacts, some extremely low artifacts. Next would be a modulation depth of 24, rate at 10. So it's going to be modulating quite a bit faster. So you can see how that could be somewhat musical, and it would have some musical applications if you had a mono electric piano and you wanted to kind of create a faux stereo effect. Lastly, we're going to have a depth of 100, rate at 10. We're going to have very high, very low artifacts, as well as kind of a faster rate that we heard than what we heard before. Right, so we could see applications in sound design, creating your own unique sounds, unique timbres. And I just want a quick note that the time differential between my left and right side is independent of these modulation depths and rates. Have to do with your delay time, and what we're hearing now is probably around 150 milliseconds. Feedback. So this is going to be a very useful tool, useful parameter within your delays. The feedback is your control that creates these repeating echoes. This can simulate larger spaces or kind of create an effect, like in dub reggae or dubstep. A feedback loop is created by routing that delayed signal. We're going back to our example of this analog tape schematic. So this delayed signal is routed back into the input and so forth. This delay time becomes additive. So the first delay might be 100 milliseconds. The second delay would be 200 milliseconds, 300 milliseconds, 400 milliseconds, and so forth. And each delay would start repeating. The feedback level is attenuated. So that means the volume decreases. And we're going to have an attenuation control as well. Otherwise, it would just keep getting louder and louder, and you just create this big loop of a mess. But we use an attenuator to bring down that delay level. So it's more musical, and each repeat is softer and softer until it gradually decreases the echo level until it's completely diminished. 0 dB attenuation, that means we're not attenuating at all, right? 0 dB of attenuation will result in a progressively louder and louder echoes. And again, you could use this as an effect. It's used a lot in dub reggae, but it's something to be aware of. If the feedback loop is too high, and you could also have a positive attenuation, so it gets even more louder. Well, here's a visual picture of what's going on in the feedback loop. So again, you have your input signal. It's being split, again, so you can mix the two levels. This input signal is going to the record head. It's played back. The distance between this, the record head, and the playback head is your delay time. And here it gets split again into the feedback loop. One end to the feedback loop, one end into your mixer or your DAW, your attenuation, and back into the record head.